In last night's debate, several Democratic presidential candidates were asked if they would consider expanding the Supreme Court. It's a concept commonly referred to as court packing. Here's how they responded.
The Constitution does not specify the number of justices that serve on the Supreme Court. If Roe v. Wade is overturned on your watch and you can't pass legislation in Congress, would you seek to add justices to the Supreme Court to protect women's reproductive rights?
I would not get into court packing. We had 3 justices. Next time around, we lose control. They had 3 justices. We began to lose any credibility for the court has at all. Beginning next year, if in fact one of the justices steps down, God forbid, in fact, I would make sure that we would do exactly what McConnell did last time out. We would not allow any hearing to be held
Thank you, Mr.
for
Vice
a new
President.
justice.
We can't go on like this, where every single time there is a vacancy, we have this apocalyptic ideological firefight over what to do next. Now, one way to fix this would be to have a 15-member court where 5 of the members can only be appointed by unanimous agreement of the other 10.
But I actually believe if we were selecting from one of those things, that the smarter move might be to look at term limits or having people cycle off from the appellate courts so that you would have a replenishment of perspective.
Zoe Tillman covers courts and justice for BuzzFeed News, and she joins me now from Washington. Zoe, thanks so much for being with us. What did you take away from the candidates' answers on whether they would expand the Supreme Court?
It was really notable that this was just the first time we heard about courts at a debate so far. There's been no mention of it, to the dismay of lawyers on the left and liberal legal advocacy groups who have wanted to make this more of a voting issue for Democrats in 2020, the way that it's been a major key voting issue for Republicans for years. It was a strategy that Trump used to sway wary conservatives in 2016 by saying, even if you're not comfortable with me, think about the courts, think about these lifetime appointments to the federal bench. So, the fact that we heard about the courts at all at a debate was notable, but, it was still couched in the context of another issue, in this case, reproductive rights and abortion, I think reflecting that it just hasn't been as much of a key voting issue as a standalone for Democrats as it has been for Republicans.
Well, we heard proposals from Joe Biden and Julian Castro there, but what are other candidates' plans for the courts? We haven't heard a whole lot from them so far definitively on this in response to surveys asking their opinions on different ideas for court reform. We've heard that some candidates like Senator Harris, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Warren, Andrew Yang are potentially open to the idea of adding seats to the Supreme Court, while candidates like Senator Booker and Bernie Sanders and Julian Castro and Beto O'Rourke have been a bit more hesitant. And again, they're sort of split on this issue of term limits and whether they'd be supportive or open to it or against it completely. But I think all of them have expressed an interest in appointing judges and justices who embody some values that the left feels are important. But again, it just hasn't been a major platform for any of them so far. Well, last month you wrote an article about the divide within the Democratic Party over how to make the courts a major voting issue in 2020. Tell us about the contrast in how Republicans and Democrats view the judicial branch and what the left is trying to do about that.
I think where the disagreement is on the left is how hard to push it and how far to go. You don't hear from Republicans about things like reforming the court, changing the structure of the court. The priority is just, we're going to fill the seats with conservative judges and justices, and that's why you need to vote for us. If there are issues as a conservative that you care about, like abortion, gun rights, the size and power of the federal government and federal agencies, we need conservative judges. On the left, there's a broader range of issues that we see candidates potentially tying to the courts, whether it's abortion, the environment, civil rights, voting rights. It's less focused than it's been on the right. And there's now messaging from groups who are saying it's not enough just to talk about the kinds of judges that candidates would put on the bench, but the structure of the courts, about adding more seats to the Supreme Court, which is very controversial to counterbalance the current conservative majority, imposing term limits. There's a proposal to rotate lower court judges up into the Supreme Court to try and address that balance. So there's just very inconsistent messaging coming from the left still in a way that we just don't see anymore from the right.
So far, are any of those strategies working? Is there evidence of that?
I mean, these groups are getting candidates to talk about the courts, which is, a big hurdle. In 2016, it just wasn't something we heard about, even though there was an open Supreme Court vacancy at the time. It was rare to hear Hillary Clinton talk about the courts, to talk about that vacancy, and tie that into her campaign in a major way, the way that Trump did. So it's still early, but we're waiting to see, if candidates talk more about it, and especially if they try to match Trump's strategy of putting out a short list of Supreme Court nominees, which again was very successful for him. The left is a bit more on the fence about whether they want to see candidates commit to a list of names at this point.
Right. It was a strategy that I know at the time was sort of a head scratcher for some, but ultimately, as you've noted and others have noted, was a successful strategy, at least politically, for President Trump. All right, Zoe Tillman. Zoe, thank you very much.
Thank you.